the questions that she had for the selectmen on the prior list.
I'm not exactly sure where you want to put them, whether
Is
it's
this
basically.
the same as what you emailed you before?
Hmm?
Is it the same as what you emailed me before?
Yes.
No, I have it, I just, so, questions? With John's assistance, revised the questions that we discussed at our last meeting and circulated them as we discussed. So I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at them or consider them further, but I think, however painful it may be, I think it makes sense to go through them one at a time, just quickly. If we're gonna vote on them tonight, it makes sense to go through them one at a time.
I agree, because we made a lot of changes, and I think we all said last time, all right, we need to look at a fresh copy of this once all the
Yeah,
changes are
yeah.
made, so I think it's our opportunity to do that.
So, question one. I don't know if people wanna go through with your notes or what, or if we just wanna, there were a lot of notes, a lot of moving parts, to try to summarize as best I could based on what we discussed.
So why don't we just go through your questions as they're listed, and
Sure.
Right.
That's-
if someone has
Yep.
an addition or subtraction, they can chime in.
Do people need time to read this? Or do people already get answers? It'll take a couple minutes. All right, let's just go through them. Question one, very basic softball, is your board elected or appointed, and if appointed by whom?
Fine.
And I think that's a good start. Second question, what do you view as the main mission of your board, and how do you prioritize your responsibilities and duties? It's two questions.
I had a question on the how part. Are you looking for the method they use to this is my question. I read these as,
What are your priorities versus how do you prioritize?
yeah, well, the method you use to prioritize or the order of priority? You know, how,
I think that's two different things.
yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. What I sort of did is I read these questions and said, and tried to answer them for some organization I belong to.
Okay,
And that would be a question in my mind, what that how meant.
so I am more, for this question, I am thinking that it's not about the process of how they prioritize, it's more about the, what are your priorities?
Yeah.
So, this, I would suggest we change it to two questions. So what do you review as the main mission of your board, question mark, and what do you, what are the priorities, what responsibilities and duties are priorities of your board?
Yeah.
We can make that two A and
Mm-hmm.
two B. Which employees do you appoint? Pretty straightforward.
And just to be clear, we're asking about specifically employees, and we don't, we're not asking about other committees that they appointed.
Correct, well,
Okay, just clarify.
I don't, well,
Confirming.
that's, that's a good question, actually, because this is about our town government, we don't wanna exclude that, we could have, that could be a two-part question. Which, employees, as in like department heads, do you appoint, and then which, like if we'd ask the moderator, do you appoint the finance committee, or should ask the selectmen, they could have a whole.
Which is not an employee, right?
Right,
And they
so,
do appoint committees.
yeah,
This is
so,
what I'm thinking.
so, which employees do you appoint, and then maybe a new question for, or
Or 3B.
3B for now, to make it
Right.
easier.
Yeah.
Which,
You said, you could ask it, do you appoint committees, and
if so, which ones?
if so, yeah, what type of committee?
Well, so an ad hoc committee, ad hoc committees. So what I have is, do you appoint persons to any other committees, and if so, which ones? Do the members of your board generally have experience, knowledge, or skills specifically related to your board's functions?
Note that that's a yes/no question. Are we looking for a yes/no answer?
I think we are.
Okay.
The question, do we want to follow up on that? I don't know if we want to get into asking someone to really give more detail on that question.
I don't think we need to know the technical expertise of
Yeah.
everybody on the committee.
Fine, just
Yeah.
And I mean, that
ask
could
me a
mean,
question.
so, someone who's elected may or may not have skills, someone who's appointed would hopefully have skills, and it's,
Okay.
And there's always the opportunity to say, can you elaborate on, you know, if somebody says yes or somebody says no.
Well,
If it's a
I'm,
yes.
I'm glad you raised that, because I wanted to discuss whether we should do that. Because if so, we should be a little consistent about it. If you ask, do you want to elaborate, and I don't say, do you want to elaborate, you know, we might get skewed results. So that's the first thing I wanted to discuss. The second thing was also, if somebody says, I don't understand that question, can you tell me what that means? I'm a little nervous. What if I were to explain it differently than someone else? So I just wanted to raise the concern.
Well, that's part of the margin of error in one person interviewing, having different interviewers,
Yes.
you know?
Exactly.
so I am always in favor of trying to get clarification. So if you don't understand a response, then I think you should ask that person for it. I also think if you want to ask for color, if they're willing to give that to you, you should ask for it. But I don't think it's gonna be part of our final report. I mean, we should discuss it amongst ourselves, but for the purposes of compiling a chart of responses, I don't know how you add color to that, except for maybe our general thoughts and comments, in addition to that. So I think it helps.
I have no objection to saying something like, can you elaborate? I just wanted to make sure that that was
I think it puts the person.
okay with everybody here.
I think it might put the person you're talking to at ease a little bit, and that's what you want. So, you know, can you elaborate on what your experience is? And do you think that was the reason you were appointed or not? You know, I mean, that type of thing gets people talking. Whether it has to go in a final report, I'm not sure.
Hmm?
That's what I think.
So we all good with number 4?
Mhm.
Number 5, how important is it for the members of your board to have experience, knowledge, or skills specifically related to your board's functions?
So it's almost
I
like
guess-
follow-up to number
yeah,
4.
I
Do you
think
have
so.
it, and is that important?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's dig behind that question. If you're, say, the water department, you're supported by a water superintendent who really knows his stuff, it may not be as important. But I would think for the most part, we'd want someone who has some type of related experience, knowledge, or skills so they can add value to the whole process, so. As I look at that question again, I wonder how valuable it would be. So we want to, and how do we put it into context? Does it need to be on a scale of 1 to 10? I think
Well, you certainly could say that, you know.
oh, let's leave it in there,
I
because
would.
that helps clarify 4.
Mm-hmm. And I touched a little bit on that about the decisions, but you also will find out, supposing you run across people who say, no, nobody on my board has any experience. Good to know. You know, why did you appoint them?
Well, there's two kinds of experience. There's technical experience, and then there's managerial budgeting kind of experience. So, you know, if you have a very strong, like you said, superintendent, they're going to have all the technical knowledge. You know, you're going to be guiding them to make good, the board could conceivably be guiding them to make good decisions from an administrative, budgeting, legal point of
That's
view.
the kind of thing that we might want to find out.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
it's also very common, I think, for elected and appointed board members to have no experience when they first get on. It takes some ramp up time.
Mhm.
So in my experience, you know, and almost, you're looking for good people, and, you know, they learn on the job for the first year of their term for a lot of these positions. So, but that's why I'm waffling on the value of that question. So I think it helps to keep it in there. I don't see the harm in the police, and so, let's just keep it in there. Because honestly, I expect the interest to be all over the board on that one.
Yeah. And the mere fact that we're talking about it so much means that we probably should hear what they have to say too.
6, how often does your board meet? Is that sufficient? So I think we want to add some more language to is that sufficient? Is that sufficient to accomplish the board's main goals and priorities and long-term planning? I think we want to, sufficient for what? A bare bones operation, or sufficient to be able to consider big picture issues?
Well, maybe you get specific, I'm not sure, but you'd have to believe that a board has sufficient meetings to do their job, but the parts that we're trying to get at are long-term planning, budgeting, improvements and stuff like that.
So maybe there's a follow-up question in parentheses, and it says, if no, please explain.
Or do we want to say, how often does your board meet? And then say, do you feel that's sufficient to allow you adequate time for long-range planning?
So
Improvements, whatever.
I wonder if we want to move question 8 earlier, because question 8 talks about how much time do you spend on long-range planning, how much time, and so it may be, that 6 and 8 are related, or can be combined, or rearranged in some way.
Okay, we can move 8 up to 6.
Or move 7 up to 6 and move 6 down, and then just follow it with all the rest of the 8. And at the end say, is that sufficient?
Well, 6, 7, and 8 are definitely related, and as I look at 8D, I think, I'm not sure if I like the characterization in there about,
The word unnecessarily.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that maybe performing over, we want to just have that D be performing or overseeing operational or administrative tasks. Question mark. And then take the second part of D and somehow combine that with 6. So let's just keep 8 as a pure fact-based, like how much of your time is spent on
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z.
Right, so D ends after tasks.
Yes. And then, so, I would propose that we renumber 8 to number 6, and everything else gets bumped down 1.
Yep.
back to number 6. How often does your board meet? I like that question.
Mhm. I like the way you phrased it there. Is that sufficient to accomplish your main goals, priorities, and long-term plan?
Okay.
That's good.
Seven, does anyone have any questions or improvements for 7? Administrative tasks generally handled in a routine and timely manner.
I think that's a good question.
Do we want to put in any of the language from 8D that we struck?
That's what I was just looking at, trying to figure out how that would work.
It could be 7A and 7B. 7B could be, would you characterize administrative tasks as unnecessary requiring the time of oversight by your board?
What's the first part of that
So,
question?
first part of 7 would be A.
Yes, and then the second part would be,
Second part of 7 would be, 7B would be the part of 8D that we struck, and it would be essentially that,
Are there administrative tasks that might be characterized as unnecessarily
you.
requiring the time or oversight by your board? Like that?
good, thank you. That makes sense. Hmm?
maybe different color pens. Before we move on from 8, which we moved up to 6,
Mhm.
are there any other categories? I think that's a fairly important question for us to figure out what people are focusing their time on. For instance, what I was thinking is, in particular A, improvements. How can we improve services or costs or efficiency of town operations?
If I did anything with that, I would maybe rearrange the lettering. Because right off the bat, you're saying to them, and maybe you wanna leave it that way, possible improvements, instead of saying, how much of your time is spent performing or overseeing operational or administrative tasks. I mean, that's like the sort of basic function, and it doesn't really matter, but that just seems more.
No, C and D are exactly the same. Now that we've changed D, C and D are exactly the same, so we can strike one.
Yes.
Well, D.
Make sure we. Yeah.
So I like your thought. So to me, most boards' main function is to set policy, and it's up to the administration to carry that policy out. That's why I put that first. You could separate A into 2 parts. Maybe possible improvements is really long-term planning anyway.
So, I'm thinking of one time I went into the Conservation Commission because I asked and they approved my taking down some big trees that were near a wetland. Was that policy? Is that what, were they doing A?
No, that's not policy to me, that's,
No, what isn't policy to me either, so that's just their core business. So where is that in this list?
That to me is an administrative.
It's an administrative
Owning
task.
or overseeing operational or administrative tasks,
Okay,
that's their core work, well,
Right, they do policy in the sense that they have regulations and bylaws, and they want to maybe suggest a wetlands policy, for example. So they do some policy, but they have a core function of administering the wetlands regulations.
okay.
they have policy, but then they apply it, and that's why they have policy.
Right, that's
Yeah.
Right, so, okay, so that falls under their, I was just wondering, where does their day-to-day reacting to a request from a citizen falls under C?
Well, I
Performing or
included that
overseeing
in,
operations.
their decision making,
Okay.
you know, what they base their decisions on.
So I think, as I read this, there's no category here for hearings or that type of formal decision making, or almost adjudicatory, you know, processing the application by the order of conditions or something like that, Conservation Commission. So maybe,
Well, I don't know if
So
that
you
applies to
don't-
the majority boards.
I think, well, for a lot of boards, it's a lot of what they do, like the Board of Appeals does that, the Conservation Commission does that, the Planning Board does that. I would think that the Board of Health does a lot of policy, but they also do hearings, so it's sanitary. So that might not be maybe we can expand upon, see, performing, overseeing operational and administrative tasks, including, exactly, decision-making on, I don't want to just say applications, because that's important to think about it.
I think that, I know I'm skipping down to the placeholder, but you need to say, what do you base your decisions on? Are your bylaws, precedent, et cetera, et
Yeah,
cetera?
but that's almost getting into legal aspects of things. So, I mean, the Conservation Commission is gonna base their decision on the wetlands regulations and the application from it. That's not gonna be,
They might have bylaws that they have to,
right, but we're not talking, I suppose, if we really, I think we're getting off track to do this, but if we were to open up this review to review of bylaws and regulations and things like that.
I'm not saying they have to review the bylaw, but
No, I know, but every board has a charge, whether it's by bylaw or statute, or our charges from the Board of Selectmen. Every board has a charge. I don't think that their legal framework for what they do is something we need to worry about. I mean, if we were to do a town charter, maybe it would, but I just get the feeling that that's not the direction we want this to go in. I think that question, how a decision is made, has value in the sense that you get advice from a superintendent, you get advice from the council, where you get your data. That type of information, you know, what are you basing your decisions on is not unimportant, but I think just going down a rabbit hole if we start talking about you know, what bylaws or what statutes are you basing your decisions on.
it could also be their experience, their education. Their, you know, I mean, some people have say they've been on the finance committee for 10 years, it's a lot of experience. And when they make a decision, they weigh, is it part of their experience?
Oh, I'm sure, you can't discount that.
No.
But, but the finance committee, for example, they have like one statute and one bylaw, and the bylaw says exactly what the statute says. So you know, maybe what you're asking is, do they investigate the facts first? It's a very broad question, and I'm trying to figure out how to narrow it down to make it more useful for us.
So we're still, it sounds like we're skipping around. We were talking about old question 8, new question 6, which is talking about how much of your time do you spend doing things. And So, trying to understand how much time boards spend doing things, are you trying to ask how much time they spend making decisions? Where's the time element in your question, I guess I'm trying to understand. Percentage, right, we're, old question
We're
8,
talking
new
about
question
time,
6.
and
This is time.
I'm not really
Okay.
necessarily talking about time.
Okay,
I'm
so,
assuming that if their decision is based on whether it's bylaw or precedent, they already know that.
okay, so I was trying to tie together the question, you're talking about something else, okay, so I just wanted to get on the same page as you, thank you.
All right, so let's focus on number 8 here. Do you want a new category for hearings and hearings and decisions on
So instead of making it part of C,
instead of making part C? So I want C to focus on purely administrative tasks, like are you looking over the shoulder of a superintendent or conservation commission agent or whoever it is to make sure that they're getting their job done? Are you signing checks? You know, what is it that you're doing that's truly administrative?
yeah, then you need a separate.
A separate question.
Yeah,
So to me, those types of hearings on applications, matters that come before the board, like the Board of Health, when they issue a cease and desist order for a failed septic tank, those types of issues is what I'm trying to have encompassed in this other category, and I'm trying to.
What are these things called? There's hearings,
There are hearings,
there's
What, the petitions?
petitions?
enforcement actions. Petitions is good too, so that should probably come first. Petitions, applications,
Applications, that's good.
hearings, and enforcement actions. And that can be the new D.
Yeah.
Maybe we want to put budgeting up higher than, budgeting should almost be B. Well, what's more important, long-term planning or budgeting?
Well, I think you have to have a budget.
Yeah.
It's immediate is budget.
Yeah.
It comes every year, so.
So I'm gonna suggest making budgeting B and then push everything down 1. All right, Libby, here's your chance to shine.
Uh-oh.
How are decisions made? That's your question.
Yes, well, my feeling is that every government is based on something, has their authority based on something. And it's usually bylaws, precedents, elections, et cetera. We're not on a military coup, exactly. So, you know, and I think it's a thoughtful question. It's a question that, you know, is asking them to think, what's your basis for making a decision?
So when you say that, I think it would be incumbent upon us to know the legal framework. Maybe it's good to see if they know it too, but I still want to refine this question somehow. And I don't know that I want it to be, are your decisions based on what statute or bylaw, do you receive your authority from? Like, that's not really what I think you're after either.
No, I'm not asking for specifics.
Just in a general way.
Yes, you know, certainly we have bylaws that govern certain areas of the boards, et cetera. I don't know every single one of them. I have lists, but, you know, like, if it's the Board of Health, there must be bylaws.
There are, but a lot of these things are also state regulations, like they enforce the state
Exactly.
sanitary code.
State regulations.
And so, but trying to, like, regardless of our form of government, there's gonna be a board of health and it's gonna enforce the state sanitary code. So like, that to me doesn't, I mean, I guess the board of selectmen could act as the board of health and every other board if they were so inclined, but, to me, that doesn't help us. I don't know how that information helps us. I think if we were to tweak it, it could, but I'm trying to, it's your question, so I'm trying to get, elicit more information from you about how you want that to be.
Well, I understand what you're saying about, okay, some is state law, some is town bylaws, some is precedent, some is education, experience, et cetera, but that's the same thing I'm saying. You know, so if,
So can you refine this to say, do you base your decisions on experience or law or regulations?
Sure.
Is that what you're saying?
yeah, like, how do you reach your decisions as a board member? Local bylaw, state law, precedent,
Oh,
experience?
she's looking at this thing right there.
I have it, I'm sure
I have it.
Would the answer to most of them be all of them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I also don't think that, precedent, there really is no legal precedent, in the sense that, like, if one board makes a decision, another board's not bound to follow that decision. They might out of fairness, but, it's not legally required that they do that. I mean, it's
Sure.
different from legal precedent, that's what
I
I'm
understand
talking
that,
about.
I understand what has come before,
Yeah, and I don't know,
or historical.
so what do you base your authority on elections? I'm not sure, you know, a particular board member might, elected board member might feel as if they have a mandate based on who elected them, but in my experience, most board members are trying to do what they think is best for the community. I don't know. I guess I'm still looking for a finer point on number 9. So is this piece here with the six bullets, that's what you want, that's what you would propose for number 9?
I would. You don't have to use precedent, I understand that, you can use historical, what has come before, why do we make the decisions we do? I'm not always sure.
So could local bylaw, state law, or regulations, could that all be boiled down to legal requirement?
Yep.
And when you say what someone tells you, is that really advice from
Advice, that's
administration, town employees? When you say what someone tells you, what does that mean?
You could call it personal advice. I don't know necessarily. Sometimes when I listen to some of the boards talk, I think, oh, wow, where did they get that information? You can
So-
ignore it if you want.
So, no, I don't think that's, of these, one is, I think, the most valuable. I think, you know, data or information from town employee or,
Well, certainly we have town employees that,
Mhm.
you know, have more knowledge about certain things than
Right.
a board member, and if you listen to that person, then, yeah.
if I had a question about why my storm drain doesn't work, and I needed
Right.
to ask someone, I would go talk to David Bond.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the expert, and so that's what I would do. So, to me, that could be advice, information or advice from,
A town employee.
Okay, I was wondering if it was actually a counterpoint to the one above it.
Research?
Yeah, I was wondering if it was
It could be.
I was wondering if it was almost, it's not research, it's essentially anecdotal information.
It could be percentages.
Something that David Bond tells me, trustworthy though he may be,
Mhm.
it is
It's
nevertheless anecdotal information unless I get research, unless he backs it with research, I should say.
Well, that's what the research,
Yeah, well, I'm, the way you phrased it, information or advice from, you said town employees, I don't know if it needs to be restricted to town employees. But I'm okay with that. I was balancing that in my mind against research versus what someone has said.
yeah.
I don't think we should necessarily put down something that someone has said. That,
I agree.
you know, that a board, whoever, say Board of Health, that's what, has talked to somebody who's been in a situation that is difficult, but it involves Board of Health laws or bylaws, et cetera. And then they come up again at a meeting, and they say, oh, you know, so-so, you know, I'm gonna go back and talk to that person before I make a final decision. I don't see anything wrong with that. You know, and if they discuss it with the board.
So you're asking to see really what people do for independent investigation, or if they just rely on what's on the customer's goals? Is that one of the main goals of this question?
Well, there is research, there's also anecdotal information, and I think that both could be valuable. Also depends on the person who's making the decision.
I think, we voted on this, I don't know, just thinking that in form, refine it again, and just so it's clean, and vote on a clean version.
Yeah.
That would be my preference. So what I would propose, just going through your bullets here, is local bylaws, state law, get refined into legal requirements.
Okay.
Precedent be defined to past practice.
Past.
So a lot of times,
It is.
that's, you know, this, the way we've always done it, so that's how we're doing it today. So I would keep it like that. I would add experience in their education, to personal experience in education. And then, we need to figure out how to refine research. So research could be many different things. Researching something on the web, it could be calling a state agency, it could be, you know, employing into practices of other towns. It's a pretty broad category, so
It is.
I don't think there's a need to refine that necessarily, but it might be helpful to put examples next to it for people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And most of those examples are probably going to be written materials,
Written material's a good way to phrase that.
as opposed to the last bullet, which is verbal.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
That's the difference. Research is written or published materials, I don't know.
Well, do we want to break it up into written? Because if I were to call, say, for work I'm doing, if I was to call Massachusetts Department of Revenue, they're gonna give me oral advice.
Oh, okay.
So,
You're right, so we probably don't want to restrict it to written, because I would assume a verbal answer from a state agency is,
you're gonna follow that.
has a certain weight to it, that
It
way.
does, yes. So,
Is the difference between what you're getting with research and the bullet after, whatever we're calling that one, does it have to do with the level of authority or knowledge of the person or the organization you're getting, the expertise? Yeah.
obviously the expertise.
Hmm.
research based on,
But you could get materials where online from Wikipedia, and you have
Yeah.
you have no idea what their qualifications are, so.
Right. It isn't, I don't think written helps
Right.
delineate what the expertise level is.
So
That's a tough one.
I think that research, maybe it's personal research, and then under that, or within parentheses next to that, we have categories. You know,
well, then you could do, you could have written material, you could have, information gleaned from a state agency, information.
You wanna go to the sources of the research, I think, state agencies,
Any agency.
Government agencies.
Government.
yeah,
Yeah, I wonder,
professional consultants or something like that, I mean, I don't know exactly.
Yeah, you could go to
so maybe
academic.
maybe it's not research the term's not what we're looking for, maybe we're looking for data.
Mhm.
And maybe it's, data from A, B, C, or D. And one would be,
Oh, yeah, how about data from trusted sources such as, and we're not going to name what we consider trusted or not, we'll leave that to the person, but give some examples.
right,
But you could say state agencies, academia,
Right, correct.
libraries.
maybe that's a separate question, is how do you receive your data for your decisions?
Okay.
And maybe that bullet comes out, we have,
The two.
we
the
have,
last two?
so the first we have 3 bullets for how do you reach your decision as a board member, legal requirements, past practice, or personal experience or education, and then the new question is, how do you obtain data for your decisions?
Mhm.
Is it data or data?
Either.
Big, yeah, or tomato, tomato. Alright. Does that work for everyone, and it's all gonna be number 9?
But, so
Not
just tell me what the choices are for the, how do you reach your decisions, is it only 3? Legal requirements, past practice, and personal experience or education, are those what you're saying are the
I think so.
3 choices?
Well, so local bylaw and state law, along with
Legal
regulations, I
requirements.
think,
Yeah.
boil down to legal requirements.
Yeah,
Precedent, I just rephrased
Past
to past
practice.
practice,
Yeah.
and then,
Personal experience or education. It's okay with me.
isn't data likely to figure into their decision-making process?
and experience overlaps a little bit with past practice as well, but, so maybe we wanna say past, practice of the board, of your board, or is that,
Or the
No,
town.
because somebody could come on the board and be absolutely brand new, but they've had a lot of personal experience, whether they.
With the state health code.
Yeah, exactly, that they've been from another town, or they've been in academia, all sorts of different areas. So I think that I wouldn't combine past practice and, because past practice is more, well, this is the way the board has been doing it for the last 20 years. Is there a good argument not to do it that way?
I think to your point though, Lou, most boards are gonna say, yeah, all of these, right?
Yes.
yeah, it's gonna be a percentage, it's gonna be a percentage of some. And maybe that's a follow-up question is, but that's really getting maybe too far out of the corner, so I think that's good information to have, that will be in the next version of the questions. And Dave thought he was getting out of a vote tonight, and we were wrong.
Oh, yeah. He's gotta make up his mind.
So is 10 superfluous now?
What are those? Yeah, those are
Decisions,
Yeah.
goals, decisions and goals are two different things. Okay?
I would hope decisions are oriented toward long-term goals. But sometimes, you know, you're making a decision on enforcement action, that's not really what we're talking about. I mean, I assume that the intent of this question is to understand how they're making policy as opposed to how they're really dealing with the failed septic systems, something like that, right?
Okay, then we can probably get rid of 10.
All right, before we, are these, Libby, these related to 9 or 10 before we go on to the,
Not necessarily,
Okay.
I do still think that I'd like to ask the last one, do you favor centralized or non-centralized government?
well, let's put that one in the other category at the end.
Okay. That's fine with me.
All right, so 11, does your board have any town employees dedicated to assist your board with fulfilling your board's missions and duties?
My question to that was, you want to know, in addition to the employees that they appoint.
No, I think that could be somewhat redundant. Well, let's see, someone could appoint an employee that serves multiple boards, so, and that relates to, 11 relates to how much time they're spending on their administrative tasks. I don't know that we want to, maybe we need to say dedicated full-time to assist your board, but like, I don't know if we need that question.
Well, I think it's a good idea because you don't know, are different departments sharing an employee? There's nothing wrong with that.
No, but there's not at all. It provides some color as to whether or not our boards are, why they have to do what they spend their time on the way they do, but it doesn't really get us to helping to decide whether or not we need to change the structure of our government.
Well, it could also, we could have a better understanding of our people in town hall stretched thin or not, you know, I mean, I have no idea.
That would be good to know, but I don't know that that's something that we in this committee are trying to address.
Yeah, it seems
We're
like
not
when we,
addressing it, but it might be helpful to know it in the long run.
you know, it strays a little bit into the personnel side of things, which I was trying to avoid. But, you know, if someone doesn't have access to someone, a town employee, I'm trying to find, I don't have the town bylaws, but I'm guessing that, most every elected board has some person that works with them.
Appointed to do minutes,
Yes.
et cetera.
There are definitely employees who wear multiple hats and work with multiple boards, but, I'm sure the
Not
top
every
rank-
board has an employee assigned to take their minutes.
Oh, okay, there you go.
There's a person on the board, there's a person on the committee that does
Takes
it.
the
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah.
So,
So is the question less about whether you have it,
No laugh.
and should the question instead be, do you have what you need?
Sounds like you having fun.
Do you know
It-
what I'm
You
saying?
know what
right,
you
that's
need
the
to-
implicit message right there.
To get
So-
everything done.
Does your board, this is not really the question, I'm just thinking it out loud for a minute. Does your board have the necessary support from town employees to assist you with fulfilling your board's mission? Something like that.
And I'm trying to recall too, who drafted this question and what its genesis was. Were we trying to get redundancy of employees, redundancy of work? I'm not sure.
Well,
Or is
I
it just?
didn't put it together, maybe, there's 4 of us here, we should be able to figure out.
That might have been my question.
Or-
I had a lot of questions, I don't doubt it.
Going back to what John said, you could say, instead of town employees, does your board have, from town hall, what is necessary to,
Well, town hall is town employees.
I know, but, it's a larger.
Are we trying? Interaction with other town boards and departments.
So-
So what we're trying to figure out is, if somebody needs some help from someone, that's someplace else in the government, that they don't have control of, they don't, in the reporting structure, does it work? Isn't that what we're trying to figure out here?
That's part of it, but we're also trying to figure out is, are boards able to spend sufficient time on policy and long-term planning, or is there time being focused more on administrative tasks that they could have out?
So then there's 2 things. One, do they get what they need from town hall vis-à-vis to get their job done? And do they have enough administrative support so that they can focus on long-term planning, whatever?
Well, I think I like John's direction of, does your board have sufficient administrative assistance to allow your board to fulfill its missions and duties? And then based on that information, we can decide what, or the board of selectmen can decide what's more important for boards to tackle administrative tasks or to focus on policy.
So we're changing 11 to that?
Yeah, I think, did your board have sufficient administrative assistance? To assist your board with fulfilling its missions and duties?
Yeah, I do like that better.
Mhm.
12, how does your board oversee the activities of town employees dedicated to assist your board fulfilling your board's missions and duties?
So is that question getting at how the Board of Health manages the town employee, the
Yes.
health commissioner or health agent?
So,
So you're not here all day, how do you manage the person that is?
it's a management style. I mean, how often are you reviewing their activities?
Mhm.
I know a lot is probably based on their competence to a particular employee.
Yeah.
Maybe that is, how does your board oversee administrative tasks being conducted on behalf of your board?
But is it more than just administrative tasks? You have a part-time board managing a full-time employee, which means that there isn't an in-house manager managing that person.
Well, in theory, the town administrator should be managing all town employees in that sense. Maybe the question is, how does your board oversee how your directives are carried out by town employees? You're setting up policy. How often you review, the implementation of that policy and see so 11.
So again, without wordsmithing, I'm just trying to understand the difference between 11 and 12. So 11 is trying to ask, are you getting enough assistance?
Yeah.
Number 12, what we're trying to get at, what are we trying to get at for number 12? We're trying to get at how do you manage those people?
Not how you manage it, how do you, how are your votes implemented, and do you review how those votes are implemented? I think that's really what it's getting at. And for the most part, it really does relate to 11, because if you have someone that helps you full-time, that's pretty much the answer, that's how it's getting implemented. So I'm not sure, it also doesn't really fit interactions with other town boards and departments.
No, because that's the person that
Right.
belongs to,
Right, so,
belongs in your silo.
I think 11 by itself is sufficient, and we can draw conclusions from that.
I do not object to removing 12.
Anyone else? Comments?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is, and how, at the end of 11, you say, and how are the activities overseen? How are the administrative activities overseen? So,
I'm guessing that a board votes and trusts, it's the person in town hall to help them make sure it's done.
yeah, okay, that's fine.
13 is really, it's a little different than 11. Does your board share administrative duties with other town departments?
Do we mean duties or do we mean personnel?
Personnel, I written down personnel, so that was my question too.
I think we mean personnel. Do we even need the question? 11.
I don't think so.
Because what we really want to know is whether or not they're getting is sufficient administrative assistance. I mean, maybe that's the question that asks for some clarification. If they say no, so well, why not? And they might say it's not in the budget, they might say, well, they're helping this other board, they could say anything.
Perhaps as we ask, we should be flexible to the complaint, non-complaint, whatever, you know, and say, okay, tell me about it, tell me what, you know.
Yeah, that's good for anecdotal, we don't want to be the complaint department.
No.
Anecdotal evidence there.
But yeah,
So 13 gone?
Yeah.
Shorter is good.
Shorter is definitely better.
Less is
Simpler is
more.
better.
Less is more, that's right.
14, Part A, does your board interact with and or receive any directives or suggestions for improvements from the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator? If yes, please describe in general terms and state how often.
I don't see any problem
Let's ask, I like the question as
Mhm.
well. I think the purpose of that question is to try to get a better understanding of what the level of cooperation across the different town boards and departments is, and how centralized or decentralized we currently are.
with that.
Well, it's 15 gets at that as well, which is nice.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I think